Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy and governance. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed, standing in for your regular presenter, Hamza Idris. Now, speaking at the 63rd Ordinary Session of the Authority of Heads of State and Government of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, at Bissau, the capital of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, President of Nigeria and the new chairman of ECOWAS, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, emphasized the need to protect democratic culture in the sub-region. As chairman, Tinubu will play a crucial role in leading ECOWAS member states towards economic development, political stability, and cooperation. He will also collaborate closely with member states, regional institutions, and international partners to implement initiatives aimed at promoting economic growth, regional trade, integration, and social development. Here are some of the highlights. Take a look.
Leader, the unanimous endorsement by West African leaders clearly demonstrates the trust and confidence reposed in President Tinubu, and he has pledged that under his leadership, frameworks will be harmonized to actualize the dreams of ECOWAS.
We must be firm on democracy. Democracy being the best form of government. We sat here, we make some sacrifices for it.
But he is warning that the threat to peace in the sub-region, occasioned by an emerging pattern of military takeover and an alarming rise in terrorism, must be urgently addressed.
We should make a pledge here that in furtherance of our region's economic recovery and growth, we will commit to democracy and promote democracy and rule of law. I am with you.
After he had received handover documents from the outgoing chairman, who is Guinea-Bissau's president, the Nigerian leader stressed that he was fully committed to deepening democracy and good governance in the region, and that he would engage with countries in transition to ensure their quick return to democratic rule.
We will not allow coup after coup in West Africa sub-region. We will take this up seriously.
Before the handover, the former ECOWAS chairman and president of Guinea-Bissau had appreciated his fellow leaders for sustaining the vision of the organization despite the global economic headwinds and trouble spots within the region. President Embalo identified Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Republic of Guinea as countries where the constitutional order had been distorted. On the other hand, Nigeria and Sierra Leone had sustained constitutional order through democratic processes with recent successful elections in their countries. Tracking the president at the ECOWAS summit in Guinea-Bissau, Kehinde Amudu, Trust TV News.
Now, back on the home front, President Bola Tinubu has given his approval for the creation of a presidential committee on fiscal policy and tax reforms, which will consist of professionals from both the public and private sectors in the country. Now, Special Advisor to the President on Revenue, Mr. Adelabu Zak Adedeji, explained that this is in line with the President's recognition of the importance of a sound fiscal policy environment and an effective taxation system for the functioning of the government and the economy. Also, their responsibilities expectedly will encompass tax law reform, fiscal policy design and coordination, as well as tax harmonization and revenue administration, among other areas, as outlined in a statement by Dele Alake, the Special Advisor to the President on Special Duties, Communications and Strategy. Now, these are some of the areas that we'll be unpacking and interrogating on the show tonight. And join us to share their thoughts and perspective on the issues. We have Mukhtar Suleiman here with us in the studio. Mukhtar Suleiman is a communications strategist. Also joining us virtually is Dr. Saeed Tafida. He's a public finance specialist. And of course, he's joining us virtually via Zoom from Port Harcourt. Gentlemen, good evening to both of you, and thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll take a quick break and we'll come back to set the ball in motion. Join us again. Right. Welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. Let's begin on the home front, especially looking at the economy, the tax reforms embarked upon by the Tinubu-led administration. And of course, gentlemen, a very, very interesting conversation to be had about where this is going to likely take Nigerians. So if I can start with you, Mr. Mukhtar, give me your take, because obviously for a lot of people, the economy is central to the success or the failure of the Tinubu administration. How well do you think he's doing so far, 42 days plus into this new administration?
I think if we follow the Tinubu campaign, the promises and the standard of how the man actually views governance as a whole, he has always been a pro-tax person. He has always said he's going to expand the tax nets of the country and ensure that more and more people are actually caught in that whole spectrum so that we can all pay tax to increase the GDP of the country, which I largely don't actually have a problem with. Predominantly, where my own issue is with the Nigerian government naturally has always been in the aspect of where would the monies go to, how would the monies be spent, the entire process of the proceeds that are going to come in, what will be the value that the Nigerian people will actually get from it. If you look at other larger economies, of course, across the world, you look at the United Kingdom, for example, people pay tax as high as 40%, 30%, but they get the benefit of their tax, and that's why they don't complain about it. Ours is just at a 7.5% margin, but if precedence has actually shown anything about Nigerian government and the culture of financial reforms, is that a selected few people actually embezzles this money and they go practically scot-free, or they strike a plea bargain system to actually get them off the issue that they have. So I think so far so good with the new committee. The members of the new committee actually looks very promising. So that's actually a good thing for us. Another thing that I think is a bit okay that he did recently was the suspension of the 5% tax, which was actually because that sort of was going to catch a lot of people unawares. And then with the current fuel subsidy menace that's actually increased the cost of services and goods, you are going to introduce that tax system into the system. Honestly, it's going to actually cripple Nigerians.
But obviously the government is foregoing something by suspending the excise tax on telecommunication services, as well as locally manufactured products, for instance. So the government is obviously foregoing revenue that it could accrue as a result of those taxes. In the long run, do you think this will spur economic growth and development, especially in judging from the fact that resources are quite lean, and for the Tinubu administration to really make its own mark, whether it's on infrastructure, on security, on poverty front, on trying to apply some sort of palliative because of the subsidy removal, they do need the money. So do you understand the rationale behind taking some of these things off the table as far as government revenue
when
is
you
concerned?
say the government is actually foregoing something, it sounds like they already own that thing and then they're actually letting it go. Not entirely. Because if we're looking at the fact that you're asking the citizens to actually cut themselves slim to ensure that we can accommodate whatever excesses is going to actually, the economy has actually suffered over the past 23 years of our democracy, then cut the cost of governance. Cut the salaries of the political appointees, cut the salaries of the senators, cut the salaries of the governors. Let's also see that the ruling class is also really literally, not the government in an abstract manner. Let's see the actors themselves actually putting something on the table. Because if you look at how much these people are accruing collectively, cumulatively from the budget, it's a lot of money, especially when you look at their salaries and upkeeps. Have you seen any indication,
Mr. Mukhtar, that would suggest that that's where the administration is likely?
I haven't.
What the administration is likely to do?
I haven't seen that, but it was just for me, I think that was just a response to when you said the government is actually foregoing something. Because if you look at the entire structure right now, you cannot fix the country in 100 days, in your first 100 days in office. And I think as excited as a president, he needs to actually pump the brakes a little, just to allow people catch their breath. Because we are actually trying to we're trying to settle from the shock of the first subsidy removal, and knowing Nigerians, we're going to settle in well. But to introduce the 5% excise tax immediately is actually going to cripple our purchasing power completely, because people actually, salaries are not going up.
Right.
Salaries are not going up, earnings are not going up. If anything, the country is still
the negotiations with the labor and everything.
Yeah, so until all of that actually comes to play, and then more money is coming to our foreign reserve, and then foreign direct investment have actually increased, and then Nigerian economy can actually absorb it. Because I know a few days ago, there was a report by, I think it's the Bank of America, that actually says that the Nigerian currency has actually been undervalued for a very long time. So let's see what the new CBN governor, if he comes into play, let's see what he can do regarding that to ensure that we can actually get to where we're supposed to be.
Dr. Said, let me get your expert opinion on what is currently being going on right now. I mean, the administration came on the heels of revamping and repositioning the economy. What are your thoughts about this new tax reform that the president or the new administration of President Bola Tinubu is trying to achieve? And this new presidential committee that has been set up, a lot of people are saying more of the same. I mean, President Muhammadu Buhari had his own special advisory committee on the economy. They didn't amount to much as far as Nigerians are concerned. What are your thoughts about these reforms and what value they could be adding to our economy?
Good morning, viewers. Good evening, viewers, and it's a pleasure being here. So I want to be clear on some things. I like the way the whole fiscal space in Nigeria is going now. And I must admit I like it for two reasons. First, it's even the direct opposition or direct angle is showing people. Because economy is not simply just about something you just go in and fetch a water. It requires a lot of actions because in reality, one action may negatively or positively affect the other activity on the other end of it. So the whole of it then becomes, when it comes to policy, it has to be clear and it has to be coherent. So when the present president is coming, there's all this fear, this view, the tax man is coming, there'll be a lot of taxes. His first major action in fiscal policy was to cut down on some taxes. This to show that there's a certain degree of understanding or leaning towards what is going to happen. Now, there's another thing I also want us to know. When we talk about cut down taxes, especially the excise duty, which is cut down on single-use nylons, which have effect on the environment. So you see where the angle I'm saying. Now, if you allow it to continue going, the environment is also going to be affected. But in reality also, because of the pain of fuel subsidy being removed now, it becomes paramount to also make life a bit much easier for citizens to be able to live before you come up with a certain process. Don't be fooled in the system of economy. Because they said excise duty is cut back on single-use nylon, the president can simply just give another instruction that anytime they're selling a nylon to you in a shop, if you want an extra, you should pay a certain amount, which may be equal to the same excise that has been cut out. But the difference is when you talk about excise, it builds into the cost of the nylon, which builds into the cost of the process, which invariably increase even other costs of other things, which is actually a point that has to be looked at. Now, another thing, the constitution of the fiscal and taxation, it is very, very, very important that that is being done, especially when you look at the level of news and taxes that we have, when you look at the level of so much hope of there's resources, but there's so much poverty, there's money that can be seen from a distance, yet there's no much result that can be seen immediately. And importantly, the lack of trust that the citizens have on the government. Regardless of whatever government do, so far this trust doesn't exist, that challenge continue to exist. Now, with this decision that is being taken, we're hoping to see some concrete action. Action number one, we're hoping to see something clear on what does it really mean that this new committee are here? What decision are they going to take? Are we going to continue paying in excess of 50 different taxes levies that presently that are in our taxes and levies approved list of connection in Nigeria? Recently, we even had an issue where someone was asked to pay merriment taxes in merriment levies in Abuja to the tune of 250,000. Now, for a lot of people don't even know what is a merriment levies, but because they are already existing in the list of levies to be collected by local governments, it can be imposed at different rates. Now, this gives room for so much collection, not necessarily so much remittance. And this making his businesses difficult to run. So I must say kudos to the present administration setting, especially in the...
I just wanted to chime in because we do have a tiered taxation system in this country. There are federal taxes, state taxes, and local government taxes. How do you think this committee is going to function vis-a-vis the existence of all these other taxes that are collected by state and local governments? I believe we'll circle back to Dr. Said in just a moment. But I mean, to his point, It is quite a very cogent point about the nuisance that the taxes contribute, because businesses are stifled. You have to pay the states, you have to pay the local governments, you have to pay the federal government, and sometimes you're paying multiple agencies or departments at one go, which does not allow your business to really break even in some cases. And we had the medium and small scale enterprises talk about how businesses wound up usually in their second year. What are your thoughts about how they could perhaps explore the synergy between federal, state, and local government? Because I do know that while the federal government has prerogative in terms of collecting federal taxes, there's very little they can do about state and local government taxes, because that's the provision that the Constitution has given.
I think if businesses are growing as much as they should in the economy, there will be very little or nothing, little or no complaints about this different level of taxes, because they're actually necessary. That's how governments run. Government needs these taxation systems to be in place for them to run. However, where I might see that there's a problem is the duplicity of function that other MDAs actually have, which is part of what the clamor has always been around issues of cutting down governance and cutting down cost of governance as much as possible. Another thing that actually contributed significantly to the fall of MSMEs, as you actually mentioned, is beyond the taxes that have actually that are actually in the system. It's another thing. Another major issue is the ease of doing business. The economy, the policies that actually exist are not making it very easy for businesses to actually thrive and actually make as much money as they would actually want to. For example, right now the first subsidy is gone, so people have to pay premium price for gas. So now you're paying 537 naira to fuel a generator. Cost of production is going to go up because there's no stable power to actually help you with the production cost. So because of that, you have to cut staff. The staff that you have to work overtime for lesser amounts of money. So these are actually the things that might need to be put in place. And if those things are actually put in place, citizens themselves will actually not have any problem with paying their taxes, because they know they are getting the remuneration and the benefits of it actually at the end of the day.
A lot of people think that this is President Tinubu trying to implement the Lagos strategy on a national scale, because we know how the Lagos state government over the years, which would definitely be predicated on his administration's legacy from 1999 to 2007, taxation is something the Lagos state government has been very good at, so to say, much more than many other states across the federation. Do you think he's going to have a lot of success with this on a national level? I
think the Lagos politics is a very small space, as big as we think Lagos is, but at the expense of sounding like I'm campaigning for the man, I am not. Please, let me put that disclaimer out there first. If you want to critique the Lagos system, you have to also acknowledge the fact that Lagos is currently one of the biggest economies in Africa. The economy of Lagos alone is about 5 African countries combined. The economy of Alaba International Market alone, how much it generates, is about 2 African countries combined. So if that taxation system has actually upscaled the economic activities in that state and has ensured success in local markets, because if you look at it, most MSMEs in Lagos State actually tend to actually do very well because of the way the system has actually been designed to actually enable business to thrive. So if that can be duplicated on a national scale, I think that would be a good thing. But we have to be a bit careful. Why? The nuances in the South are completely different from the nuances in the North. I keep making reference to this. Just a few weeks ago, I published an article with an opinion article with the Daily Trust newspaper that actually spoke on how poor consumer behavior can actually thwart good policies. So if the endline consumers at the end of the day, which here are the citizens of the country, are not put into consideration and what their cultural nuances are, especially their behavioral patterns, their socio-economic stance, their socio-cultural beliefs, are not put into in-depth consideration, there's going to be a lot of problem in implementing most of the policies that are coming out. Okay,
speaking about implementation, we have Dr. Said back online. We do have a quote from the President's Special Advisor on Revenue, Mr. Adedeji. We can put up that text so we could give you a sense. He said, Nigeria ranks very, very low on the global ease of paying taxes, while the country's tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world and well below the African average. He said this has led to an over-reliance on borrowing to finance public spending, which in turn limits the fiscal space as debt service costs consume a greater portion of government revenue, annually resulting in a vicious circle of inadequate funding for socio-economic development. While some incremental progress have been recorded over the years, the outcomes have not been transformative enough to change the narrative. Dr. Said, he went further to say the administration hopes to attain 18% tax to GDP ratio within the next 3 years. You're an expert, you understand financing. Is this feasible or is this just wishful thinking?
Let's be sincere here. If we're really going to look at things, first of all, I want to apologize to the viewers for the disruption. It's actually the internet thing. I sometimes don't have control over it. When we talk about tax to GDP and the realities, if we're going to mop up what is being paid by real taxpayers across the country and compared to GDP, it's most likely more than even 18%. When we're talking about tax to GDP, most of us, so that's why one of the strategy they're taking for harmonization, or we're advising them to take, one of the strategy for policy coherence, which we're advising them to do, is important to look into, is presently, is not that there are no enough taxes that are being paid. It's only that there is no enough taxes that are being reported. So let's be clear here. If you go to the market, apart from the taxpayer who collects where he reports to the government the forms into the nominal reporting of GDP, you find 6 to 7 other people following, either collecting for you, for giving you the space to stay, for coming to that market, for work. In fact, I think somebody will even collect from you for smiling too much. If you take the example of an Agberu style that is collecting people for the hand of money from hand of motorists, with all these touts on the road, all these monies end up in the hands of someone else. So let's be sincere here. When we're talking about a good harmonization in which all taxes are pulled together into one pocket, where you know whatever that is being paid is a form of payment, then we can actually put the real picture of how much tax to GDP we have. Recently, FRS made an assertion, which they said the actual tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria is not the current rate that we have, about 6%. It's about 10 point something percent, 10.18% or thereabout. And why they said that is they also tried to look at other revenues that are being generated by other entities. So if this can be projected just for calculation of normal statistics baseline and shifting where the money comes from, imagine what happens if you cover all the leakages that you are having now. Now, let's go back to that statement. And it's not a lie. Nigeria is very low in ease of paying taxes. It's not because it is really not collecting the taxes, because how many of us even understand what are the taxes you're supposed to pay? Even our experts among us don't fully understand what exists as a form of taxes, because you hear economists saying, and Nigeria, our personal income taxes is just about 7%. It's actually not true. Nigerians pay up to 24% in personal income taxes. But why is it that we're all paid to this 7%? Because basically that's what we see. Basically that's what we calculate, and we assume at that time, why are we not seeing all the resources? Now, back to your question. Is it an overthought of achievement? It's not. What is just required is proper harmonization, cleaning of nuisance taxes, making sure all the resources are pulled together in one pot. Then you're going to really know how much it's even your tax to GDP ratio. Then we know how do we even increase it further or backward. But for now, where we are, it's not an actual reflection of what is collected in the hands of people as it reports to the GDP.
And for most people, Dr. Said, this speaks to one particular issue, corruption within the system. There is a lack of accountability. There is a lack of transparency, as you did say. Sometimes you go months and then you hear the declaration that has been made as far as revenue from tax is concerned, from your grain markets or from your regular markets. And you wonder, I mean, the markets are always full with traders, with customers, with vehicles going in and coming out. But at the end of the day, what is declared is completely different. How much is corruption responsible for this underperformance as far as taxation is concerned? And what can we do realistically to sort it out? And also on the nuisance tax, because I wanted to double down on that before we lost connection with you. We have a tiered taxation system. The federal government collects tax, the state government collects tax, and the one tier of government that collects the most tax, which is very astonishing to me, is the local government. So how do you harmonize that, especially given the fact that this is the federal government that is trying to run point on this tax reforms? How do you do that?
So on the second point, I'll come back later, because that's the way the dichotomy between Lagos and Nigeria will have to come to play. When you asked question earlier, when you're discussing with Mukhtar on Lagos and taxes of Lagos. Now, let's start with the first part of the question, which actually looked at how do we really make the difference?
I'm afraid our connection is experiencing some signal issues. We've lost that connection to Dr. Said. We will try to reestablish that connection back with Dr. Said so he can finish his thought on some of those issues. And, you know, just to the second point that I did ask him, do you think this is wishful thinking? 18% tax to GDP ratio in 3 years. I mean, Nigerians have had to deal with the promises that were not met 8 years ago, for instance, about $1 to 1 naira, for instance, 3 million jobs and so on and so forth. Realistically, what are your expectations? What are your senses telling you about, you know, this sort of projection by the president's special advisor on revenue?
I think first thing is, I might not be able to speak to the technical aspect of the public of taxation, but I can speak to the governance structure of it. So if you look at it, like I said earlier, one of the major problems that Nigerians have actually had predominantly with the taxation system and government generating revenue from its citizens has nothing really to do with paying the tax itself. It's about what is the remuneration from the tax? What do we get back when we actually end up paying most of these monies to the government? So this is usually where the bulk of the problem actually comes from.
But as I did point out in that question, there is also a problem in which Dr. Said rightly pointed out, that sometimes people actually do pay these taxes, right? But what is declared at the end of the day is far below.
That's where the problem. That's
so
why
how
I
do
said
we
there's
deal
a
with that corruption?
That's why I said
the
there's a miss of a trust. A miss of trust. So on the upside of it is at the federal level, if the government itself can actually be deliberate about its attempts to actually fix most of these issues, one policy can change the dimension of the entire country. Because that's actually coming from an authority, it's a government. So when we discuss about government in its entirety, one of the things I try as much as possible not to do is not to discuss about government in abstraction. Government is not an entity that exists in an abstract or in opaque. There are significant face actors who play the governance game at a specific period of time, although the faces might change over time, and in Nigeria it's every 4 years, depending on how the courts actually rule after the elections. So when we look at the current system now, we know that we are seeing the president himself and his essays, because so far there has been no ministers yet. So we're seeing the president and the essays, and then the committees that are being set up to actually look at the entirety of this reform. So to some extent, you can actually see some deliberate action from somebody who probably understands what the problem is. So for me personally, I've always said that I want to give the man his chance to fail. Because at this point in the country that we are in, we cannot be pessimists. We cannot keep being pessimists. We are hanging very precariously right now, and we need to actually support the president to ensure that he gets it right at the end of the day. So if the president is actually very deliberate about his actions, let's see who becomes the CBN governor, let's see who becomes the Minister of Finance, and let's see who actually heads the departments and agencies and parastatals that have to do with finances. That would actually tell who becomes the next FIRS boss. That would actually tell how the dynamics and dimension of the country is actually going to be.
So I mean, as far as the first 42 days are concerned, you're happy with the decision to remove subsidy? Because apparently,
well, to say I'm happy sounds like I'm getting.
I mean, you just said you're giving him, you know, the benefit of that.
You know, for me, I'm actually living in that mantra of it's always darkest before dawn.
Right.
I know for a fact that for it to get better, it has to get really bad at first, because it's not really bad in a bad sense. We have to actually feel the heat. Before you actually grow muscles from the gym, you have to feel a lot of muscle pain. So it's actually.
So again, you are for subsidy removal.
I've always been for subsidy removal.
Right.
The problem I've always had with subsidy removal, however, would be before you remove the subsidy, ensure that there's stable power in the country, effective and efficient intra and intercity road transport networks to ensure that the effect of it can actually be alleviated from the local people. And that was not something that the president did. But however, now that's me speaking from the governance part of it. Now, if I'm going to speak from the political part of it, which is something that you cannot take away, because I've always said it is good policies and good politics that brings good governance. Right. So while the policy part of it is actually, these are the things you need to do, the politics aspect of it, if you understand the fuel subsidy game and how it has actually been for a while, you would know that for you to actually remove fuel subsidy, you ought to have done it the way the president actually did it. If not, you have no intention to remove, because then vested interests are going to come in from the political angle and find a way to talk you down.
Okay, we'll circle back to those good policy, good politics that you talk about, especially if it's well implemented, because implementation is at the heart of the conversation. We've seen so many fine ideas that amounted to nothing in the past, and many Nigerians right now are not trying to hold their breath about whatever it is that is in the pipeline, especially as far as the projections are concerned. We take a quick break. When we do come back, there's a lot more to unpack as far as the tax reform of the Tinubu administration is concerned. Plus, we get to also segue into the ECOWAS conversation. Nigeria's president is the new chairman of the ECOWAS body going into the next 1 year, and he does have some very interesting ideas about entrenching democracy on this sub-region of the continent. Join us after the break for more on Daily Politics. All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching Daily Politics on Trust TV. Do well to follow us across all our social media platforms to catch up on more content. And of course, do enjoy the YouTube live stream where you can keep up with developments on this and many other shows. Back here in the studio, we're having a conversation around the tax reforms embarked upon by the Tinubu-led administration. We're also going to segue into the conversation around his emergence as the chairman of the ECOWAS. He has been handed over the mantle of leadership from President Embalo of Guinea-Bissau over the weekend. And President Bola Tinubu has expressed some, very popular ideas around entrenching democracy in the ECOWAS region, especially looking at the instability in certain African countries. But before we do that, let's wrap the conversation around those tax reforms. Dr. Said is joining us via Zoom this evening from Port Harcourt. The connection is back. Dr. Said, we're happy to have you back. Finish your line of thought on the question earlier about the nuisance taxation, the tier taxation, and what you were about to say before we went off.
Yeah, and the corruption around taxation. So when we talk, as I said, the whole laws that define taxation, tax is always defined by legal frameworks. And currently is the legal framework that we have that created this different segmentation. No one says this legal framework must go because it will cause a lot of political challenges if you say they must go. What we're just saying is let the processes be harmonized. If there's a simple declaration as a company, this is a clarity of what you're supposed to pay. Then out of what you've collected, this goes to the federal revenue, goes to the federal government, this goes to the state government, this goes to the locality from which the company is situated. I think it makes all tax collection easy, it makes the system simplified, and it will generalize and make it better. And this segregation is done by the taxes and levies approved list of collection already, which is a legal document that is even being challenged and tested in several courts so far. And it is still ongoing, that it is not valid, it is not standing, it's not a constitution. If you remember some years back, Governor Wike of River State once came out and said value-added tax should not be collected by federal government, states should start collecting it. All of the challenges is going to the taxes and levies approvals of collection. So this is the time to look into that again. This is the time to go take us back to the text, to the table. We all know it. What do we need to do? Go back to the drawing table, look at what works and see how to make it work and how to work together. So this is what we're calling for, and we're hoping that will reduce the tier system, that will make the system better. And I like the whole formation of the committee, which will create a certain degree of consultation, creating results that will really build the whole system. Now back to corruption again. The whole of taxes now, as I said, Why we keep saying tax to GDP is low? Well, it's not because an average person in the market does not feel the burden of being taxed. If you meet an average person in the market, she will tell you, I am taxed here, I'm taxed there. But at the end, you're still telling her it's not equivalent or it's not enough, because Nigeria want to see at least, which the whole world see as an average, should be around 20% to GDP, or 18% is acceptable, which is the current African average. So, but all of these things can be achieved if there's a better policy coherence. It can be achieved, is a better harmonization, and we are calling on the new committee to put this as a priority to what they can do. It's not that works have not started on this already. Work have started. We had the World Bank support across Nigeria through a program called the SIFTES. There's a system integrated fiscal transparency system, which supports states to develop a legal framework that will harmonize their tax processes. And the federal government already designed is a bit harmonized, is a bit clear. All that matters is not to merge it and see how best we can create the system. So now, even if we're just merging harmonizing the states and the local governments to have a better sanity and reduce the nuisance taxes, I think it's a good way to go. And I think it's a way that we can create a system that Nigerians will trust and would like to engage. And it's not that Nigerians don't like to pay taxes. In reality, everybody today, if they call you, they said, everybody contribute 2020 naira, we're going to marry off our system.
Okay. Just before we segue into the ECOWAS conversation, recently, this idea or policy about car ownership taxation or certificate, certification payment of 1,000 naira that has been thrown out there has been one of those issues that has come up of late. And we know Nigerians we love our cars, but on the point of nuisance taxation or multiple taxation, I mean, as a car owner myself, I know that when it comes to paying for your appropriate, particulars, when you go to the local government office to obtain all those documents that the VIO cross-checks, whether it's your insurance, whether it's your car particulars and things like that, that is something that is encapsulated in it. But when you heard 1,000 naira for certificate of ownership for cars or taxation in that format, what comes to your mind? Isn't this just more of the nuisance taxation that we're trying to avoid?
I was still trying to wrap my head around it when the news actually came out about paying an additional 1,000 naira for certificate of ownership for vehicles. At first, I think I read it as motorcycles, then I later saw as automobiles. I don't know what the intent of that process is. I'm hoping that, because at the end of the day, we're already paying a lot of money for car papers.
Right.
I just renewed my car papers the other day. I paid 22,500 naira to renew my car papers, and there are a host of other fees in Abuja
attached to it.
Yeah. Excuse me. In Abuja alone, there are a lot of cars already here. So it makes me wonder what the government intent actually is.
Right. I'm gonna let you catch your breath for a moment. We're gonna go on a short break. I believe we have a lot more to unpack when we come back, especially as we consider the conversation around the ECOWAS chairmanship that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has already taken charge of. More on this after the break. welcome back to Daily Politics. In case you just joined us, the conversation is centered on tax reform and the development with the ECOWAS. At the 63rd Ordinary Session, President Bola Tinubu has now taken the responsibility of chairing the ECOWAS for the next 1 year. And of course, his tenure begins at the moment. But before we go right into that conversation, I'd like Mukhtar Suleiman, a communication strategist, to finish his line of thought. With regards to the ownership, motor ownership certificate, 1,000 naira annually. Doesn't seem much, but it could constitute.
It actually is a lot, because then it means that my new car paper is going to cost me 23,500 naira every year again. All of a sudden, and I don't understand. I'm still trying to understand the intent behind that, because it doesn't make. It absolutely makes no sense for me.
Okay.
I know that we're talking about expanding the tax net. Expanding tax net means getting more people to pay their tax, not increasing the tax that we're actually paying. So it's still a bit of a struggle for me to understand what the intent for that is. But whatever it is, I'm hoping that the government can actually communicate that accordingly.
We're not charging for parking, so that's something. Dr. Mukhtar, just a quick thought on this motor ownership certificate or tax for motor ownership certificate for Nigerians. 1,000 naira a year. Are you for or against it? What do you think?
Holistically, I am against it. Strategically, I am for it. So holistically, news and taxes doesn't help anybody. When you have too much tension, too much taxes being added around, it makes businesses difficult. It makes income flow difficult. But strategically, we've been doing wrong tax system in this country for a while. So, for example, will you find us subsidizing fuel for few people who has vehicles? Well, in reality, the money that we spend on the subsidy, less than 1/5 of it is not spent on education or health. So when you talk from SDG angle, sometimes these are some of the taxes we rather go for them to reduce the carbon emission. Because if ownership of cars is forced to reduce, we're going to have a reduction in carbon emission. We're going to have a reduction of unnecessary usage of vehicles, which litter environment, and unnecessary needs for roads, which means government do not have to spend so much money in creating roads. Because the more we build roads, the more we have vehicles, the more we spoil them again. So this is what I want to say strategically, which means in the long run, I support things like this. But when we're talking about presently with the present context, in which things are so rampant and so many taxes around and littered, I think it's better we have a coordinated system where we have fewer of these taxes so that we can also grow our business. Remember, in the opening of my statement, I said economic policies are not straightforward.
Okay.
When you're making a decision, you have to be careful to think and why and what 4 more times ahead. Because one action leads to another and leads to another, leads to another, and leads to another. So we need to be careful and we need to be mindful on this. Now, if the tax is intended to reduce people who use vehicles, which in the wrong turn reduces emission to our roads, I am for such taxes. So this is my opinion.
Yeah, a lot of people would counter that by saying we just got rid of the green tax, which is supposed to, address the single plastic use products in the country.
You compensated it. Yes,
for the time being. Okay, let's segue into something a lot more bigger than just Nigeria. Even though Nigeria is big enough on its own to make this conversation a lot more interesting. The ECOWAS 63rd Assembly pretty much gave President Tinubu the realm of chairing it for the next 1 year, and he does have a lot to say. For instance, he did say we should make a pledge here that in furtherance of our region's economic recovery and growth, we will commit to democracy and promote democracy and rule of law. We will not allow coup after coup in the West African sub-region. We will take this up seriously. That's a very big statement, and I dare say one that suggests that there's a new sheriff in town. What are your thoughts about this? Politically, what President Tinubu is saying as far as the military coup d'etat in this particular part of the continent is concerned? From 1990 to date, we've had 21 military coups attempted. We've had 14 that have succeeded. Over the past 3 years, we've had 3. You have one in Mali. You have you have a host of them. Mali, just in August of 2020, you had one. In May 2021, you had another one. In Guinea, you had one in September of 2021. In Burkina Faso, in January and in September I mean, this is clearly something that is destabilizing the growth and development of this sub-region. What are your thoughts about his comments and how true they could be with regards to the socioeconomic development and growth of ECOWAS as a group, as a bloc?
I think you'll never understand the strength of Nigeria as a country unless you actually travel to other countries. Then you understand how revered Nigeria actually is, which is actually a very good thing. So when the Nigerian government actually speaks, it carries a lot of weight in Africa as a whole, let alone in the ECOWAS region. So what the president was actually trying to do was to reiterate the continent's, the region's commitment to ensure that the tenets of democracy can be embodied across all countries, and that with him at the helm of affairs, this would actually be the case. And that's why when you listen to his speech, he said, we will not tolerate coups after coups, which is actually a very good thing, because the deterioration of West Africa's development has always been in that coup attempt. To understand that, for me, I don't think there's any ethical argument for why a coup should occur in a democratic system, because for most of it is actually power tussle. So that needs to change. If you know you're not comfortable with the system of government as it stands, there's always going to be an opportunity for you to change it after 4 years if you're actually very deliberate about it. So for me, I would think that as the president is actually taking the helm of affairs of ECOWAS, this could actually be done, and maybe peace teams can be sent to the various aggrieved countries. A typical example would be this held in Guinea-Bissau, which is still a bit not too far from Burkina Faso. So these whole issues that have actually ensued in these other countries can actually be
there's the situation with Senegal also before President Sall, made that statement.
Even look at the situation of Sierra Leone before the elections.
With the elections. So just a final thought, a very quick one. Do you think ECOWAS has any sort of bite with regards to political will to exercise as far as stability on this region is concerned? A lot of people think their role is largely ceremonial, and they don't really have the political capital to make any sort of difference.
I think it is largely because we've now actually had a bulldog heading the affairs of ECOWAS, somebody that's actually very, very strong enough. The West African region of Africa actually embodies one of the largest markets that we can actually find in the entire region. And with the coming of the FTA, that's the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, if we can actually begin to implement this in the West African region, it actually becomes something that can actually be adopted by other countries across the African continent. So this is actually very important for us to actually grow our economy as a continent and ensure that there is actually stability.
Okay, Dr. Said, just before we go, your quick thoughts on the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. President Tinubu is very big on the economy. He made certain points about subsidy removal and how other African countries are particularly being parasitic about Nigeria's products that were heavily subsidized in the past. What are your thoughts about how this new regime of his as the chairman of the ECOWAS, what sort of value addition are you looking forward to as far as the sub-region is concerned?
So this will always not be too far from the main purpose of it. The whole discussion in every congregation, every union, every economic zone is actually the total sum of the total powers within it. Now, if Nigeria can take a bold step, the same thing Ghana does, the same thing Togo does, the same thing Benin does, before you realize you find a strong and formidable formation. Now, the economy, Nigeria is seen as the largest economy in Africa, not just because we don't have poverty, not because we have a lot of people that have money, but because we have the numbers to buy and sell. Imagine now you expand this number of buying and selling. You pull on, assuming Benin is another state in Nigeria, which is what ECOWAS looks like. Or we bring in from as far as Togo or as higher as Cote d'Ivoire down to as low as Sao Tome. So when you put all of this together and all of these resources are put together, now you buy, you sell, you trade among each other, you create the power of currency, you create the power of exchange, you create the power of economy, and you create a system that will consume and reproduce. What this one does not have, the other one complement. When this one is having shortage in agriculture, this one complements with industry. So bottom line is it gives the result that requires. Now imagine this holistically carried forward and immersed into the entirety of the African region. which is what the African Free Trade Agreement is bringing. So it is really something to be welcomed with. It's really something we're looking at. And I must applaud the JTI processes of the AFTA, which is the Guided Trade Initiative, in which the AFTA now is working.
Giving us his thoughts on a variety of issues, from the tax reform that has been implemented by the Tinubu administration to the development with the ECOWAS with President Bola Tinubu as the new chairman. He is a communication expert, strategist that has been giving us his take, and Dr. Said Tafida is a financial expert that has also been weighing in on some of these conversations that we've had this evening. Gentlemen, thank you most kindly for your time and your insight on this one. We really appreciate you. I wish we could go further, but unfortunately, that's the much time we have. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. And of course, thank you most kindly for being a part of our show as always. We appreciate you very much for your time and company. Feel free to catch up on more of our content across our social media platforms, and we do look forward to seeing you next time. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you very much for your time tonight.